ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Uzma Shinwari Khan, and I'm a board member of the Council of Islamic Schools of North America, and I will be your host today. Joining me is Sister Sue Labadi, board member of ISNA, and Sister Sophia Azmat, executive director of ISNA. Sister Sue will be moderating the participants, and Sister Sophia will be moderating the chat and the Q&A. These last few months, we've all witnessed a dramatic change in life for everyone. Everyone had to switch gears and go to an online mode within the span of a week. There is a new normal for all of us, and that is classes via Zoom and Google Meet. The question still remains of how to close the current school year. CISNA has partnered with ISNA and organized this webinar to address the important topic faced by school administrators and faculty members at this time. With that said, I would like to welcome our speakers for today's webinar. We are very grateful to you for sharing your experiences with us today and providing valuable information. Our panelists today are Brother Ismail Ibn Ali, Middle School Principal for Al-Fateh Academy, Sister Farah Imam, Elementary Principal for Al-Fateh Academy, and Brother Ibrahim Yusuf, Principal of Nashville International Academy. When we talk about school and the current situation, there are so many assumptions. COVID-19 spread will begin to subside in July. We might start off the school year with some level of social distancing still required. It's still not entirely safe to gather in groups and to mingle. We are each making decisions as a school community, and that is in the best interest of the students. We will make each decision that respect and adhere to the local government authorities. We have values. Safety of human life is always a priority. Avoiding harm is more important Islamically than accruing benefit. Teaching online and teaching in person requires the same passion. Humans have overcome moments of crisis by relying on one another. And it is that time when we hope to see the same thing. The questions, and if you have any, we have some norms that I would like to go over. If you have questions for our speakers, please add them to the chat. Questions will be addressed once all speakers have presented, and we will try our best to answer as many as possible. A recording of this webinar will be available on ISNA's website and at CISNA's website at cisnausa.org. Questions asked during registration will be addressed during this presentation. We know you all must have questions about the start of the school year in fall. We will not be focusing on that today specifically because it is very important and a vast topic. Our next webinar is scheduled for May 16 and is focused on preparing to open the school year in the fall. With that said, I would like to invite Brother Ismail Ibn Ali to speak about.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Inshallah, all of you are well. At least it's afternoon here in Virginia, where I'm based. So I hope you're all having a good Saturday. Just very quickly about myself, alhamdulillah, I have the opportunity to serve as middle school principal at Al-Fateh Academy alongside my colleague, Ms. Farah Imam, who you'll hear from in a little bit. Alhamdulillah, have been in education space for a while now, both in public and private schools, and have been focused primarily on middle school and high school. And so with that in mind, I'm excited to share some of our thoughts related to students as it comes to closing out the school year. And inshallah, can invite you all to think about how you're going to address different issues with students. The first topic that we'll talk about today related to students has to do with grading. And there are quite a bit of questions around this. And I wanted to remind ourselves that grading and grades are essentially a communication tool that we have to indicate to students, to families, and to people who see those grades in the future, so maybe new schools, new teachers, they indicate if a student has mastered a certain standard, a certain subject. Grades can indicate growth or participation or effort, depending on how your school's grading policy is set up. Now, with this transition into virtual school, if you want to call it that, some students have been thriving in this setting. And that has led some to question the validity of it, because maybe some students are doing too well. You know, maybe they're getting a little bit extra help that they wouldn't be able to get if they were in the building with us as teachers. On the other hand, there are students who are having a hard time managing this transition and are finding it difficult to keep up with the different tools, to keep up with their schedule in the environment being at home, where there's so many other things going on. When it comes to grading, you know, our goal is to be able to still provide feedback to students and families in this virtual environment. And in order to do that, you have to consider a few things. So I've marked here Q4, but that might be for you semester 2 or some other, you know, whatever your last semester of school is. But you want to consider, you know, are teachers assigning material to students that allows for them to independently and incrementally progress towards mastery of that given topic or standard or subject. Schools should consider maybe flexible guidelines or deadlines for turning in assignments, because you have, you know, siblings sharing multiple devices and all trying to get on for their respective virtual schools. You have to consider, are the assessments that teachers are giving accurately reflecting their level of mastery? And it's hard to judge these things. And, you know, each one of us is going to have to sit down with our teachers, with our fellow staff members, and walk through what these would look like for our school. But provided that you've gotten to a place where you feel like, okay, we know that we are, you know, teaching what we want, students could reasonably access this information, then you can start to think about how this will be reflected in their report card or in their final grades. So next slide. So the policy that we've adopted at our school that I would suggest you consider is that work during this final quarter, or any work that has taken place after this transition to online school, should only improve a student's final grade. And the reason for this is because of the number of factors that should be considered as it relates to their ability to complete the work, to do it well, for teachers to feel comfortable that they've taught it appropriately. There's so many things there that we should not allow this transition to negatively affect their grade. And so what we suggest is, you know, run the reports at the end of the school year with Q4 work being factored in. And if their grade is higher, then you can give that higher grade. If the grade would have decreased, and by grade, again, I mean the final grade, after averaging all 4 quarters, for example, if that were to have decreased, then we suggest you consider Q4 a no mark quarter. And the student would receive a final grade based on quarters 1 through 3 only, essentially up to the point that that transition then happened. You know, if your school is operating off of a standards-based system, you know, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 for a given standard, then you have to sit down and figure out with your teachers, you know, what standards were we able to teach and assess. Maybe some we could teach, but we couldn't accurately assess. Maybe some we couldn't get to because we had to prioritize other things, so they weren't taught and they were not assessed. Now, no matter what, you know, grading schemata you have, you're going to have to utilize you know, teacher comments or some other way of giving feedback so that parents, students, and eventually other schools can have more context as to the mark that you give. So if in the final grade, you know, there's an incomplete or a pass or a fail, that may or may not give enough feedback on its own. You need to give some context to that so that, you know, families are aware, okay, this happened during this time as a result of, you know, maybe lack of access to technology, maybe, you know, teachers weren't able to communicate the ideas in the same way that they would have in the classroom, you all can come up with what that might look like, but that should get communicated, because essentially a grade is a communication tool, and we want to still communicate the reality of what's happening. So those are a few suggestions when it comes to grading. We move on. This then also directly correlates to, is what we're teaching as a school valid for meeting the requirements for that course or that grade level? And, whether you're in elementary, middle, or high, your curriculum as a school, as a whole system is usually set up so that content is spiraled throughout the grades. So they may be introduced to something in an earlier grade, then it gets, drilled in more in a middle school grade, let's say, and then they may have a specific, bio course in high school. So there has to be some consideration of, well, how much of the content did we actually get to study in the school year with this transition? And that may require you to decide, well, maybe our geometry course didn't meet all the standards that it should have, so we need to remediate and have a review potentially in the 2020-2021 school year for that content that was missed, or that wasn't taught in the same way that the first 3 quarters of content were taught. Maybe, as restrictions are lifted and we're able to potentially go to our school buildings, we can offer some remediation courses at our school. We could offer plans for parents and students to continue learning online. I mean, one amazing thing through this whole process has been, I think teachers are now very aware of different tools that are online and the plethora of them. And you as a school have probably filtered, what are some tools that we want to use as a school? So you can have students who are now familiar with those platforms continue on those platforms throughout the summer. And that may then, meet the requirements that you would have hoped to have fully met had you been fully in person. And then if some of that content, maybe, you just decided this is not a priority for us right now, we have to prioritize other standards, indicate that on the final report card. Again, communicate. I think communication here is the key. You have to be open and transparent with families. We didn't teach this and we decided this because of, XYZ parameters, and let the parents know, hey, grades are important and teaching and learning is important, but student well-being is also equally as important. And we're not going to sit there and drill all of this for it to just go over their heads in the scenarios that they're in. So find a way to communicate that. It could be on the report card itself. It could be in a letter from teachers to the students and their families at the end of the year, saying what they covered as a sort of overview. You all can decide that, but I bring this here because grades are kind of related to, well, did we teach what we wanted to teach? And for the students, they need to know if they've learned what they needed in order to move on. And if not, then you say, hey, well, this is what they did. This is what we can speak to. And then it's up to, their next teacher or their next, a school to decide what they do with that information. So next slide. Now, one upside, again, like I mentioned, is that so many of you have put in so much hard work to set up this virtual school system, right? And if you look to your school, I'm sure that you're finding, at least I know I've seen it in our school, that there is tremendous benefit that we weren't aware of could be accessed through such a medium of instruction. So now, I'm sure if you go back through all your teachers, you now have a goldmine of resources that your teachers can use for years to come. The benefit of it doesn't have to stop come the end of June when the school year is over, right? If it's organized, it's documented, you have a way to store it in your school. Now teachers, maybe current teachers or new teachers can utilize that those resources to teach, even if we go back to a fully in-person school system next year or in 2 years or in 5 years, right? You may be able to harness some of that online learning and incorporate it into onboarding for new teachers for subjects that you teach at your school. One thing to consider, though, is that a lot of the tech that we're using is free right now because of the graciousness of some of these organizations to provide it in this COVID time. So you will need to consider, what are the financial ramifications of keeping some of these resources and utilizing them in the future, because they may not give it to us for free, beyond this time. So I challenge you to think about, hey, how can we utilize these for students and let that propel us into, new ways to work with students in the years to come. All right, next slide. Okay, graduation. Again, people are worried about, well, how is my student going to graduate? How do we handle final transcripts for graduates? So we talked a little bit about the transcript and grading side. Let's talk for a few moments about the, experience of graduation itself. And our goal here is to prioritize safety for families and students. And even if restrictions start to be lessened, as they have been in certain states, you have to factor in people's perceptions of safety. Even if we're allowed to go back, there's going to be, pushback from parents. There's going to be pushback potentially from students who don't want to put themselves in a situation where they feel that they may be exposed to, coronavirus. So you're going to have to flex your creative muscles. At our school, we are considering a drive-up graduation at our school parking lot, where, families in their cars will line up in a certain way. We'll have the backdrop of the school, and we'll have, inshallah, a loud mic and a few of us, there outside, just enough needed to run the ceremony. And we'll ask students, one by one, to come out of their car and just, sort of walk in front of the building. They can stand and wave, receive a certificate, and move on. You may decide that you want to do a virtual graduation via Zoom or some other conference platform. And hey, maybe the money you would have had to spend to fly in a speaker, you could potentially get for a little less now, because they don't have to fly. They can do it from their living room. You may be able to get even potentially higher quality speakers or more sought after speakers because of, the world that we're in. So you can really, use it as an opportunity to make it a unique thing, something that they will remember. And they'll remember it already. But if you take that effort, they will surely, remember that and thank you for it. You can increase your, recognition of those graduates on social media, on school websites. You may offer, if you can't offer graduation right now, you may offer to do something smaller than a graduation when you are allowed to go back to the school building, maybe in the 2021 year. And now you can utilize good old snail mail, right? You can send certificates. Maybe you can have yearbooks directly mailed to them. And class gifts that you may have done, you can, mail it. The goal is, though, that even if you wait it out, some schools are going to decide we're going to wait till August and have a graduation in the summer. That's fine. I would still suggest that you find a way to recognize your students now, as it is that time of the year, and let them feel that connection from you, even though that you're not with them physically. So just a few ideas to kind of get your brain going. And my last slide that I have for you has to do with thinking about students for the following year, because as administrators, this is around the time that we would be, if not already, doing admissions for students for the following school year. And at our school, our goal has been to continue the admissions process and just be transparent with families. So that has required us to adapt our admission criteria to fit an online medium. So we conduct virtual meetings with students when we give our student assessment. So we took the assessments that we had and we made an online version that we think still is valid enough. If they were to complete it, that would give us information that we need to determine, the different, our criteria that we have for new students. And we observe them. So we just do a video conference. The video is on. Parents are there with their students initially. We explain the process to both of them. And then we ask the parent to give some space to their student to take their exam. And I'm there to answer any questions that they may have by video. And then I do a student interview with them to get to know them as I would have done so in person. So, another thing you could consider is find other ways for people to help inform your students about the school. So maybe you utilize some of your student government representatives to talk to prospective students and prospective families. And I think throughout this process with students and families, you need to be, transparent about what options you are considering for the 2020-2021 year. And when it comes to the admission decision, right, again, for students entering your school for next school year, I would err on the side of what is the minimum amount of information that you would need to determine the student and school fit. So in the past, maybe you would have required some standardized testing data. Maybe you would have required a certain number of teacher recommendations. But to be honest, a lot of schools that at least I've been working with, they don't have many personnel at the school building or have access to their student files and are unable to send me some of their older testing data or some of their teacher recommendations. So we're deciding as a school, okay, well, what is the minimum amount that I need to make an informed decision with my admissions, team? And that's going to differ from school to school. So you'll have to decide, what you need, what meets what you are looking for in your students. And then finally, as you talk to families, and this is more of an admin thing, but just to put it here, maybe offer a conditional admission for the 2020-2021 school year. Maybe this is contingent upon receiving certain records that we do need, but we think you will have met based on your record that we have so far. And that could always be something that you work out with your registrar for the drafting of your tuition agreements, so that you're able to still accept students and they have because that affects budget, that affects so many things, teacher hirings, we can't even start to think about all of that. But at least you have some flow of students coming in, and then you may need to adjust, as you go. So inshallah, I hope, talking a little bit about ending the school year, students and grades, thinking about my courses that I'm giving students right now, graduation, and then thinking about future students has been helpful, and hopefully can get you to start, if not continue the work you're doing with regards, to students. Jazakallah khair. That's my little piece. And inshallah, I look forward to, some questions and answers at the end of other speakers, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Brother Ismail, that was really very helpful. MashaAllah, you gave a lot of points that I'm sure many of us will be using and implementing in our decision making. Thank you so much. Now I would like to invite our second speaker, Sister Farah Imam, to share her something about herself and also some ideas about faculty and staff when it comes to closing the school year.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Ramadan Mubarak. This has been a roller coaster ride for everyone, and I've been in administration for 5 years at Al Fatah Academy in Virginia. As elementary school principal, I supervise preschool through 4th grade. And there are so many of you here with us today that have been in administration for many more years, and can probably provide quite a bit of insight from your experience as well. So we ask that you add those into the chat as well as you have ideas, because we are all here certainly to learn from each other. My piece today is to talk through a little bit about some things to consider when we are talking about faculty and staff and closing out the school year. So Brother Ismail, talked quite a bit about, recognizing the students. And as a school, many of us also take time to recognize the work of the teachers that has been done throughout the year. So I'm going to speak a little bit about recognition, and then we're going to go into a little bit about the responsibilities that the teachers have in closing out the school year. So many of us have traditions within our school systems, our school buildings, where we honor years of service that the teacher has had with us. We have a special recognition, a special gift that we give for first-year teachers at the end of the year, like, hey, you survived, you made it. We do recognize teachers and staff who are not returning, and then some schools have special recognitions. This is a picture of our school building in Virginia, And it was just, I felt that it matched kind of what I wanted to talk to in this slide a bit, because for many teachers, this is a bittersweet ending. You know, we look forward to, you know, the last few days of school with our students. We look forward to those activities. We look forward to signing those yearbooks just as much as the kids look forward to having those yearbooks and signing them. And then there's teachers who are just not, who aren't going to be returning, and they may have had kind of an idea, you know, have envisioned how they were going to end the school year with their students, especially if they've been there for a while. So it is very bittersweet, and we want to acknowledge not just the hard work that they've put in through throughout the years, but also the emotional toll that it's taken on our teachers as well as our students, right? So we want to look at the well-being of our teachers. So I encourage you to continue to try to find ways to honor the teachers and recognize the teachers. It could be gifts, plaques, pins. In-person delivery is great. Using, you know, as Ismail said, snail mail, that works too. But wherever possible, wherever it's safe, you know, I do encourage in-person, 6 feet distance, as much as possible, because we are missing that. We are in a humanitarian work. You know, we are social animals. We like to see that. We wouldn't enjoy teaching if we didn't thrive on or look forward to that human interaction. And so that continues to be important, and we need to acknowledge that. My biggest advice is that you stay true to your school culture. You know, there's a lot of Pinterest things out there. There's a lot of things on social media, on Facebook and Twitter, and we're seeing other schools doing these grand parades and these grand shows of affection and appreciation, which is fine, which is great. But make sure that whatever you choose to do meets your school culture. I'll give you an example. At a previous school that I was in, it was within our school culture to constantly praise our colleagues publicly. That was just the school culture. We would have shout out walls, we'd have faculty meetings where we would take a minute to acknowledge somebody else within the faculty that did something, you know, that was meaningful for us. And it was nice, and it was part of the school culture. But then I moved to a different school, and I tried that. It didn't work out well, because that particular school, the teachers were not used to that, and it made them very uncomfortable. It made them not want praise. It made them not want to be recognized publicly. And so it completely backfired on me, right? So you have to make sure that you are doing something that fits your school. Those other things, those, you know, those grand gestures are very nice. But if it doesn't meet your school culture, then I would avoid it. You know, we encourage people to be creative, but don't force it just because it's on trend. Just because it seems like a cool thing to do doesn't mean that it's the best thing to do. Handwritten cards, video montages, social media posts, home celebrations, those are all ideas that are out there, that are floating out there, that you can certainly do. But there are some considerations. One is budget, of course. If you are going to be doing these things, what is your budget for not only the materials, but maybe mailing them out? Distance, you know, Ismail and I and the heads of school, we're planning on delivering some goodies to our teachers, you know, for Teacher Appreciation Week, and we've got just under 50 people on staff. And when we mapped it out, we realized it was going to take 6-7 hours. That's if we just dropped and ran. But you know, we're not going to do that. You know, we're going to stand there and chat for a few minutes and catch up. And so you have to really consider that. Consider what's reasonable for you. Plan it out, map it out, do it purposefully and thoughtfully. Acknowledgement, I kind of already spoke a little bit to that, but you have to look at what your teachers' love languages are, right? And that's important. If they don't like that particular kind of praise, or if it's not meaningful to them, then, and if it's not genuine, then it's not going to have the same effect or the same impact. And then access. You know, a lot of schools I see are posting things on social media, on Facebook and Twitter and things like that. But what if your teacher's not on Facebook? What if your teacher's not on Twitter? Are they going to be able to see it? Are they going to have access to it? Are you posting in enough places where they would see it? And again, you know, is that breaking some, you know, privacy policy that you have at school about posting teachers' names and pictures and things like that on social media? So those are just things to consider as you are continuing to carry on the traditions of recognizing your teachers at the end of the school year. All right, so this is kind of a silly video I want to share.
Jafara, there is no volume.
Oh, there's no volume. Oh no. Well, I don't want to reshare it. We can just keep going. You got the gist of it from just the text boxes that came up. You know, we've put our teachers through a lot. We went from, you know, planning in early February that this is an idea, it potentially might happen, start thinking about closing, what are we going to do? We're going to go to virtual, we might go to virtual school, how long? We don't have all of the answers, right? So, you know, we put things into place, you know, as thoughtfully and as quickly as we could, but then things continue to change, and they just, you know, subhanAllah, you know, I have the utmost respect and love for all of the teachers on my staff and all of the teachers that have been joining us for this ride, because they have found amongst themselves resources and a fire that I haven't seen in a long time. And so, you know, we want to make sure that we acknowledge that journey that they have made. None of our schools would be where they are without the work that they've put in, especially in the last month and a half. But it's been tough. And as we move forward to plan out through the end of the year, knowing that you have a certain end date for school, and knowing that you have a school year to plan for looking forward, you know, there are some things that are non-negotiable. And so as we move into the next portion, my advice is make sure as an admin you are being extremely thoughtful and extremely purposeful in every single decision that you make, and making sure that those expectations and guidelines are clear to everybody on staff. And I would just like to remind ourselves, and this is a reminder for myself as well, that it's the administration's responsibility to ensure that the teachers have all of the resources they need to complete the responsibilities that we are asking them to do. If we're asking them to pack up their classrooms in a certain way, it's the school's responsibility to provide those materials. We cannot ask them to complete something without having those resources, and it could be tangible resources, or it could just be the guidelines and making sure that they have you know, the specific expectations there for themselves as they are doing that. We want to make sure, you know, our school has 2 days scheduled after the students leave for the teachers to wrap up their professional responsibilities and pack up their classrooms. We are still working through kind of how we're going to do that at our school, but it's important to provide teachers dedicated time to focus on packing the school building and packing the students' belongings and kind of preparing for the next year. So focus that time in a way that makes most sense for you and your schedule as you are wrapping up the school year. And then throughout the process, get a pulse on the teacher's abilities and well-being, get the reflections on virtual learning, do surveys, do individual or small group talks. Make sure you stay in tune with that as you are packing up and closing out the school year. All right, so again, create a specific but flexible a meaningful action plan so that the teachers know how to best pack up their spaces. Some of the considerations that you want to make sure that you are looking at is the number of staff that you have total, the number of staff that you can have in the building. Some states have 50% rules, some states have 25% rules, and depending on which phase of reopening you're in, that is going to continue to change. Does your school have any protective gear that they can provide for teachers? Are teachers expected to bring their own that they're comfortable in? That is something that you would want to outline in your action plan. If you have any teachers who have health concerns or are at a higher risk for contracting COVID, then you would want to make sure that you consider that as well and plan ahead for that. I would even recommend contacting if you have an insurance policy for your school, what is the liability associated with that? If a teacher wants to come in, but you don't quite feel comfortable having them come in because of a health concern or something like that, what are the different parameters that you have as a school that you're putting into place, and what are some legal and or insurance type of parameters that you should consider in making that action plan. And then staggered packing, staggered packing for the staff, and then any staffing, any administrators that would be there, are you staggering those, who's expected to be there, and then staggered pickup and the staffing needed in order for students to come get their belongings. Just all considerations as you're creating this extremely specific yet flexible action plan for packing up. So one thing that we're considering at our school is to have teachers go in and spend one full day on just packing up the students' belongings. They had about 12 hours to pack up the students, before we said goodbye to the students in person. I think it was Wednesday afternoon or evening, we decided, okay, Thursday is going to be our last day. Thursday morning, the teachers, got shopping bags and had the students pack up their backpacks with as much essential things as they would need to try to make it through the next few weeks. At that time, not knowing that we wouldn't be returning through the end of the year. But now the students are going to come back. They're going to want their knickknacks. They're going to want, the little things that they left on the bookshelves. They're going to want any artwork that was left behind, the non-essential things that they left in their desks and in the classroom. There's these 2-gallon Ziploc bags that we typically give the students at the end of the year to put all of those types of things in. You might want to invest in some of those as a school. Schedule staggered pack up and pick up. Follow your state's social distancing and PPE recommendations. Specify drop-off locations, times. If you're not picking up your things, what's going to happen to those things. But most importantly, allow opportunities, if you can, for students to go into the classroom and to collect their items, but limit their time. I think not just so that they can get their things, but also just as a closing, as some closure to this whole situation. I know a lot of students are feeling that they just got pushed out, or that they are feeling the same thing that some of the teachers are, that they can't go back and spend the last few days with their classroom and their classmates. So allow that if you can. Think about what you're going to do with the lost and found items. I know a lot of donation centers are not taking donations right now. Typically at the end of the year, anything that wasn't picked up, we take to the donation center. What are we going to do with that? And then maybe you're storing it through a specified date. Think about where you might want to store that. Some schools have student medications within the building. At our school, we have tried to send home as much as we can. Parents have to sign it out to say that they've received it. So think about your processes for that. You don't want a whole bunch of medication sitting in your school building over the summer either. Okay. All right, so pack purposely, standardize as much as possible, create those clear expectations and guidelines for all. When you standardize that, you make it easier for everybody to come back in the fall. in whatever capacity. So you may want to create pre-printed labels for boxes, like textbooks and workbooks are all going to be in one area. Manipulatives for all grades are going to be in one area. Teacher tools. Have teachers take home their personal effects. I know a lot of teachers like to store things there over the summer. Have them take them home. You don't know necessarily what's going to happen in the fall, so go ahead and have them take those home. Start talking to your teachers about curriculum development or redevelopment. What is that going to look like for you in the fall, whether it's in person, online, or hybrid? Start considering some professional development needs. Talk to those teachers about what things they might feel like they need if you were to move to a hybrid or online full-time situation next year. Be very open and transparent with your teachers about enrollment expectations. How big are your class size looking like? What are you thinking about? Are you not going to have classes at all? What about those teachers that may not be essential and may not be needed next year? Start thinking about how you're going to have those conversations and go ahead and start having them. Inventory. So our school moved to electronic documentation for all inventory about 5 years ago. And it makes it a lot easier for teachers to do things on their own time and send it in electronically. It keeps a nice little Google spreadsheet of the different materials we have as well. I know there were some questions during registration about returning instructional resources. I recommend having Google Forms and spreadsheets and making sure that you log in what has been borrowed and what has been returned. We have a contract for any student who borrowed a Chromebook. There is a fine associated with that. So when and they sign it, so the parents sign it, so we will make sure that we get those back and coordinate a drop-off time for that at our school. Some schools have intellectual property clauses in their contracts with teachers. I mean, this has kind of been a free-for-all, right, for the last month and a half. So we want to make sure that you're collecting back anything that the teachers have created that has the school's name on it. Badges and keys and those kinds of things are also things to consider. Report cards should be sent electronically. You may want to consider having the mailed transcripts maybe in the fall. Say, you have your electronic one right now. We'll send official ones in the fall, or maybe your registrar has added some sort of note on the scanned copies that says, hey, this is official, it's coming from the school. Think about how teachers might be recognizing their students. It could be individual notes, video messages that they have for the students. And then how are you going to transition? At our school, we have internal student review documents where the teachers of, say, a second grade class will do a transition document for each student in second grade that will be seen by only the third grade teachers the following school year. Are we going to continue to do that? It's electronic, but do we have enough information for the teachers to be able to do that and give a valid amount of information that would be useful for the next grade levels teacher? All right, and then reflective practice. So when as you're sending teachers off for the summer, again, talk to them about curriculum development, how we're going to meet the needs of the school moving forward. Consider those adaptations and transformations that you've made over the last month and a half and how that can be useful. As Ismail spoke to that earlier about this gold mine of resources that we now have. How can we utilize those moving forward? And then as an administrator, are there professional development expectations that you have for the teachers? Even if you're in school in person full time, you might still want to consider some aspects of online learning and blended learning. There's some tools and certifications out there that I recommend. Google for Education certification, especially if your school is using Chromebooks. There's some training out there for teachers and administrators, level 1, level 2, and then you just pay for the test. It's a great background to have, again, especially if you're using those Google tools. The Modern Classrooms Project has been a great resource for blended learning. Common Sense Media Recognition, I know that was going around on some of those forums and threads a few months ago. If you haven't done that, then I think it would be a good idea for the teachers to do that common sense media training. And then any other plans that you have, professional, personal growth plans, anything that you have school created, any of your focus, and maybe math, it could be language arts, but make sure that you communicate those to the teachers and be open with them about what you're looking at for the fall, and in what capacity. So I think that's it. That's all I have.
Thank you so much, Sister Farah. That was really informative. And as I was listening to you, I was just thinking and planning in my own mind what suggestions that you have here that I would like to implement. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. Many of you would be thinking and taking notes about this. Yes, we have come a long way, but looks like we have a lot to do before we can officially close the school year. Now, I would like to invite our final speaker, Brother Ibrahim Yusuf, who will share information about administration, the role of administration when we talk about closing the school year. Brother Ibrahim.
Thank you very much, Sister Azma. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and Ramadan Mubarak. My name is Ibrahim Yusuf. I am the principal of Nashville International Academy. I got involved with Islamic schools back in the U.S. Virgin Islands. I was born and raised on the island of St. Croix. I got involved with Iqra Academy as a board member, actually. The reason I got involved was because I was interested in community work. And from that day on, I've been working with Islamic schools. I've worked with Islamic schools in Houston, Pittsburgh, and now in Nashville. From an administrative standpoint, I think the first slide, the first important consideration is the notion that this could happen again. So part of what we have to do as principals, as leaders, is actually meet with our returning teachers and review the effectiveness of the various programs you implemented these last 2 months. And we have to do this before we go off to summer, right? Because the reason we need to do this, as Sister Farah mentioned, is we have to reflect on what went well and what didn't, you know, while it's still fresh in our memories. For example, at our school, we had different components. We had a schedule, we had a weekly plan, we had assignments, live sessions like so many other schools around the country. So we have to evaluate the effectiveness of these things in relation to student performance, in relation to the social emotional impact it had on students. You know, was it a positive impact, or did it have a positive impact? Did it not? And also as it pertains to the instructional effectiveness at each grade level. This works for some age groups and it doesn't work for others, I feel. So you have to look at these things and evaluate what has been effective. And then another important thing to do is either with your administrative team or alone, you have to think about the practices that you would like to continue even after we go back to normal. You know, this pandemic has highlighted the importance of family involvement, of innovation, of collaborative planning. So how do you keep these things alive after you go back? One practice, for instance, that I would like to continue is this shared planning document that all grade level teachers worked on, and we sent out to families every week. I think it was very effective in making sure that all the standards were met and that instructions were being delivered in every subject. So this is the reason we need to have this meeting with teachers, as just to reflect and listen to them and gather their insights. And part of it, I think it creates a culture of shared leadership, right? And that's very important in schools because teachers are the ones implementing and doing the work. So when they provide their insights and their anecdotes and we base our decisions on the things that they see and the information that they gather, it creates this culture of shared leadership in the building. If we move on to the second slide, another consideration is what data are you gathering? What data have you gathered? For example, we should have done a survey already. Don't underestimate the power of surveys. At our school, we sent out a survey to parents within the first 3 weeks of going online. But what other pieces of data will help you in the future? Not just at restart, but when there's another pandemic or when there's a second wave. A lot of projections are predicting a second wave, right? Or that it may happen in 5 years or in 10 years. So what kind of data will help you be more prepared and not having to switch online on the fly, so to speak? So that's another thing. What if we're still doing online in August, right? Are parents happy with the tuition rate? Can you afford to lower rates? Is it going to be more expensive? How will students react to this emotionally if we have to still do it in August? And what can we do to minimize that impact on students, or even better, to make a positive impact? So that's another thing. Like, what data can you gather now that will help us moving forward? And we have to gather that data. It's also part of closing out the school year. If we move on to slide 3. The reason I think we need to gather this data, it's because we have to revisit our strategic plan, right? We have to go back and create new goals in relation to distance learning. We have to measure progress towards these goals. Think about resources. Start thinking about the budget, right? If we have to switch to online learning or have some kind of hybrid system in August, what are the weaknesses? What are the strengths? For example, one weakness I have observed revolves around the rate of dropout. We had some students, not a lot, but some students who did not participate, right? They didn't attend the Zoom sessions, they didn't submit assignments, and they virtually dropped out, right? So the next time this happens, what do we have to do to avoid that? Maybe we can let it go this time, but how often should we let it go? And what if we're doing online in August, right? So we might need more parent outreach, for instance. I think one of the things we're going to have to do is just, it's no longer about student engagement, it's about family engagement, right? And making sure parents are interested and recognize the value of online education. So you have to look at your weaknesses and strengths. Maybe your weakness is a technology gap, right? Where students who are economically disadvantaged don't have access to internet-enabled devices. So are we going to keep asking teachers to create assignments that don't require technology? Or are we going to provide students with tablets and Chromebooks? Maybe we can reach out to some of our donors in the community, someone who would be willing to fund and mitigate this technology gap. So that's the question that you have to consider when you're revisiting your strategic plan. What resources do we have? What resources will we need? When you're working on your budget this summer, for instance, you have to budget for technology. How do you meet those budgetary expectations? And finally, of course, part of the strategic plan is to look at your staff, to look at who's supportive, who can you leverage to assist and help. Determine which faculty will need support when this happens again. If you have to do it in August, which faculty will need more PD, for instance. So that's part of why we have to start gathering data, is just to go back to the drawing board and our strategic plan. And if we move on to slide 4. Now, I think focusing on strategy is probably the most important activity when faced with a crisis, because we have to envision what needs to happen as leaders, and we have to create an action plan towards that vision. And sometimes you have to do it in mid-air, right? Some people thrive in chaos, others panic and retreat. As the leadership in the building, in the community, you have to be the former, right? You have to rise to the occasion and come up with a strategy for everyone. But you also have to be a cultural leader, right? It's a mistake to think that we don't have to worry about culture anymore. You know, that culture is something for the school building. We're not in the school building. I don't have to worry about culture. In fact, this is where you get to flex your cultural muscles, right? It's all about communicating a common purpose, being an advocate for distance learning, speaking passionately about it, willing to fight for a cause. Sometimes that's really all it takes. For example, at the beginning of all this, I sent a video every day to the community for 4 weeks. There was a daily video from the principal, and it took me about 2 to 3 hours to prepare it. But it was worth it because, I communicated to everyone what I represent and what I stand for and what's important to me. And by extension, what's important to the school, right? So in the end, it's important, not to forget about your role as a cultural leader, right? I plan on, for example, hosting a community-wide closing Zoom session where everyone gets to log in, and there's just closing remarks for the year. Similarly, when I met with my teachers, I didn't start talking about platforms, and I didn't mention Zoom and Google Classrooms at the beginning of all this. I didn't talk about strategy. I talked about how it's the best time to be a teacher, right? And then during our next meeting, I talked about how we're catapulting our school into the 21st century, where students and teachers were becoming digital citizens. So when you give people a cause, they want to be part of it. And as a leader, you can never let that flame die inside of you, right? You can't let it die out. No matter what's going on, people are turning to you. And when they see that you believe in your work and you're communicating your beliefs, soon enough, everyone else will begin to believe as well. So that's part of the importance of cultural leadership, I think, during a crisis. And then if we move on to this next slide, I think, of course, it's also important to evaluate the impact of remote learning on student academics and whether there has been growth or regress. I know it was mentioned by Brother Ismail and Sister Farah. There was an article circulating a few weeks ago about not the summer slide, but the summer slide where the students lose academic growth over the summer, but they were talking about the COVID slide, and that some school districts are expecting students to lose an entire year worth of growth. Right? So imagine all the work of the first 3 quarters just lost. So we have to evaluate what is going on with students, right? How much have they grown? How much have they regressed? At our school, we are using star reading and star math through Renaissance Learning to test students. And once we test students, we will likely evaluate them, and they will receive one of 2 remediations, either a recommendation that they attend tutoring sessions, summer tutoring, or a requirement that they attend tutoring, summer tutoring. And both are done through our Title I funds. There's a vendor in our district that's providing summer tutoring for students. And of course, you also have to think about what are the available summer virtual professional developments for teachers, right? Some vendors are also providing virtual training for teachers, and that's something to look at as part of your closing out of the school year and start issuing recommendations and requirements. And I believe we have one more slide. Here I've shared 3 documents. 2 of them we're using at our school, and then the last document I've come across recently. And one of the documents, it's a testing schedule. We're using the last week of school as a testing week where students are not taking classes. And you can look at that, inshallah, when the presentation is shared with you. The second one, it's locker pickup, it's called a pickup drop-off week, where students get to pick up the contents of their lockers and drop off textbooks and AR books. And then the third one is also for teachers to use when you're scheduling teachers to come in and clean up their classrooms. That's the third document that you could use. And that would be all for my segment.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Ibrahim. MashaAllah, it was really beneficial. You shared a lot of valuable information that I'm sure most of us will be able to use, inshallah, in the coming weeks. Alhamdulillah, thank you for all three presenters. You have shared enormous wealth of knowledge with us today. And I can see that we have quite a few questions coming in. With that said, I will pass it on to Sister Sophia, who will be addressing the question answers at this time.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So glad to have so many of you join, and hopefully if we can, I'll ask some of the questions that have been asked, and I'm going to ask also the participants, if you'd like to offer some suggestions or answers, please, I don't know if there's a raise hand session, but you can type into the chat box if you would like to offer what your school is doing. One of the questions is about PE and art, if that's being offered virtually, and if the presenters have any suggestions for how to do that online.
Our school is offering art and PE regularly throughout the weeks. We didn't launch art and PE right off the bat. We waited to incorporate our specials into the daily schedule for the students a couple weeks in. So we have it so that the students meet with their PE teacher 15 minutes virtually, face-to-face, in their classroom settings every week. Typically it would be 45 minutes twice a week, but now it's 15. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ismail, is it 15 or 30? I'm blanking.
Yeah, in middle school it's 30.
Yes, yeah, in the younger grades it's 15. But then in addition to that, the two PE teachers have worked together to create weekly challenges, so physical challenges that the students can work towards, kind of like a bingo board, or it's different by age group, and then they'll create videos and share out challenges like that. They were actually in the process of finalizing a virtual field day, and we met with the teachers on Friday to talk through how we would do that. And then art, the teacher also meets with them, with all of the students by class once a week for 30 minutes. And she will do a direct instruction, and then the students are on Zoom as well, so they can show their work and show what they're doing. They've also been submitting artwork through pictures and videos and that kind of thing to the teacher, and through social media. The art teacher will give like a challenge. There was a color wheel challenge the first week of school, so the students in the younger grades had to find items around their house that match the color wheel, and then they sat in the middle of the color wheel with the items around them and then sent in pictures. It was a beautiful assignment, and the students did a really good job with it. So yes, we are still doing art and PE. They are still being given activities, but the evaluation and assessment of it will be different.
Another question has been asked was, how are you managing semester finals for middle and high school? And I think what ties into that is a question about academic integrity. How do you ensure students are doing their own work?
I have a few thoughts I could offer there. One is, well, first, when it comes to final exams, you want to consider, how much weight are you going to give to the final exam if you still plan to offer one. I have a brother-in-law who's in university right now, and they essentially did away in his, Bio 2 class in university with their cumulative final exam, because they felt that it wasn't necessary for what they needed to be able to pass the student on, for that course. So they just gave a final exam that was for the specific topics that they were doing in the virtual, room up to that. Virtual space up to that, in that time frame. So I would strongly ask you to consider how much weight do you want to give. Is it going to be a cumulative final exam for the semester? Some of you may have final exams for the entire year. Just really consider, like, do I need to have this final exam? if you come to the conclusion that you do need that exam, Brother Ibrahim actually in his miscellaneous docs, one of those docs is a testing schedule, and he has some guidelines in there that actually line up with what I was thinking as well, where we have teachers who are giving final exams or any exam of some kind in reality, are setting up a testing schedule with students, and they're basically, let's say, depending on the exam, let's just give it an hour time slot, spread out through the week, different slots. And the teacher will have 5 to 7 students, depending on what you think your capacity could be, sign up for those slots. So if at 10 a.m. there's a hour slot with 7 students taking that exam, well then all 7 log in, all of their cameras are on, as teacher explains the expectations and administers that exam in that slot. So that way they can see the students. Of course, at the end of the day, could a student have a tab open? Yes. Could a student do XYZ thing? Yeah, probably. But, alhamdulillah, with the values that we have in our schools, inshallah, that we've been instilling in our students, they recognize that this is not the time to, cheat. And again, that's going to come down to what you've established as expectations for your students. But I think that, online scheduled time with the camera visible gives you an ability to administer the exam in a pretty efficient way. Of course, now you have to consider how many final exams are they taking, over what time span are they going to take those exams. You don't want to burden students with like 7 final exams, so you may have to be creative with how you administer those. A lot of exams can be turned into Google Forms that have strict restrictions on what they can open or not, depending on if they have a Chromebook or not. You can be surprised how well you can create questions if you really stretch how you utilize multiple choice, true, false, short response, etc. So don't downplay the fact that you can still have a strong exam online, but it really will come down to how much scheduling can you allot for that kind of exam that would require all of those parameters to be in place. So,
yeah, I also feel that classes should end before you begin testing. So just designate a week for testing, and then that's the only thing you do, and create a schedule. Like Brother Ismail said, just create a schedule that works for your community, works for your students. Send it out to parents beforehand, a good few days, a week beforehand, so that they can arrange and know beforehand what to expect that week. And it could happen online. I think if you have a proctor, a teacher observing students virtually, you can tell whether someone is in the background, whether the student is looking somewhere else, or talking to someone. So I think it can be done like Brother Ismail said.
Another question was, how are you handling students with special needs? And I know that's a tough one. Even, public schools, all different private schools are all facing this issue and having difficulty with it. So if anyone has any ideas.
I think that's one of the things we have to think about moving forward. How can we, those are one of the weaknesses. I know some schools are considering hybrid situations where some students come in on certain days, some groups come in on certain days while others stay at home and work virtually. So maybe struggling students and special needs students are the ones who should be coming to the building for direct instructions and for one-on-one and for services. But for this time around in March, it was, for the most part, at our school at least, just the one program for everyone, with individual differentiation, in classrooms, in different classes. But it's something that, for sure we have to start thinking about. I don't have the answer for special ed kids just yet. And I think a lot of research a lot of literature would probably be generated in the next couple of months about online learning. And we just have to wait and look out for the research and read the literature and come up with ideas that work for us.
Yeah, I think that's very true. What you said is we're all kind of learning as we go and trying to just share ideas and and there's a lot of cooperation, alhamdulillah, going on, but there's no expert here right now at this point, no experts anywhere, because as you've heard the word, unprecedented, right? That's what everyone is saying. And I think that this is tying into something about finals, but the question is anyone planning to give MAP testing, or basically standardized end of the year testing, and how is that being handled?
We don't.
Go ahead, Safara. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, we decided not to do any type of standardized testing before we even left for spring break, which is in early April. We did not feel that it was something at that time. We didn't know that we weren't going to be coming back. And even at that time, we decided that we were not going to be doing standardized testing if we were to come back. And now that we're not, we're just not, we're calling it a wash for this year.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Same here, because we have to be current on current events and affairs, right? And when our community see that public schools and everyone else, they've just avoided standardized testing for the year, there's that sentiment in the community, like, hey, why are we doing this when others are not? And is it necessary? And you got to keep relationships positive. So yeah, you can just forget about standardized testing for the year. I would recommend that.
So another question that's related to the whole testing issue is also just basically not for finals or end of the year exams, but just grading the students. How fair is it, giving them grades at all? And I know some schools have said something about going to pass fail. How are some of your schools handling this?
We came up with a kind of a matrix of, if the student does this, then what happens? If the student doesn't do this, what happens? We landed on kind of the terminology of sufficient opportunity. And if the students are given sufficient opportunity to demonstrate that they've understood that particular standard or skill set, then they would receive a grade for that standard or skill set. If they did not have sufficient opportunity, or if they were given sufficient opportunity and still were not able to demonstrate understanding, then they would receive a no mark for the quarter, for the last quarter. And the no mark is different from pass, fail, or incomplete, because it indicates that the student had the chance, they were given the instruction, but they just weren't able to grasp that understanding within the context that we're in right now.
Yeah, I think I can just add on that, again, this goes back to, ultimately, what is your goal as a school for the end of the year? Like, for us, it was continuity of learning, that, students, as they go online, they can still learn. Whether there was a grade associated with it or not, we believed as a school that what they're getting in terms of their instruction is critical for their development as young people at that age, at that time. And that meant then that, okay, as we hold students to the expectation that they're going to continue to learn, well, then they should be able to see that their effort can translate into something like a grade, because grades, again, essentially are a way for people to know, well, did my student understand this concept or not? So if, as Ms. Farah said, there's sufficient opportunity, then we felt that, okay, we can express that through a grade. If for other reasons it was not able to happen, then you can communicate that through your, report card, or through whatever communication mode your school wants to use with your families and your students. But I would suggest that, don't underestimate the amount of learning that can happen. There is a lot of learning happening. And it may be in different ways. Like, maybe it's not the same way that you're used to in your classroom environment, but mashallah, students are resilient, parents are resilient. And when you encourage them, right, to continue to learn, and grades can be a means of encouraging them, depending on, you have to balance the stress of a grade versus what does a grade communicate. And some students have thrived. Like, I've really seen some students, they can do it at some, a little bit of their own pace. They can get more time to work on things, and they're really demonstrating mastery well. And other students just are not able to function in that same capacity. And we recognize that, and hence the flexibility in the grading. So don't underestimate what your students are learning. I would say they're probably learning a lot. And and I think the biggest thing, to be honest, and Farah and Ibrahim, you can talk to this as well, is helping teachers manage their expectations for what learning should look like. Because in the classroom, you all put so much effort, and I know it, up late at night, crafting lessons plans and experiences. And in virtual school, you feel like you can't even get maybe a fifth of that because you're just not used to it. But I can guarantee you that all that effort that you're putting in is paying off. It just may not pay off in the way that you're used to seeing, So don't underestimate your capacity as teachers. And as a result, don't underestimate the students' ability to learn within this new, environment.
Thank you, Brother Smooth. There's a lot in the chat box. People are offering their suggestions, so I do recommend everybody kind of try to go through that, and we'll keep that open for a while anyway after we officially end, so that you can review the chat box. There was a question about, and some questions are kind of geared towards what we're going to do in our next webinar for planning to reopen in the fall, but there's a question about professional development, or actually I'm going to put in something, but how are you doing teacher evaluations to close out the year? I don't know if, I know some of you have probably been thinking and talking about it, if you'd like to address that issue.
Go
ahead.
No, fadal.
So for us, I think, by now, every principal would have already known who they want to hire, who they want to rehire. So it's just a matter of communicating this information to your teachers. I knew, by March, who I wanted to rehire, so what I did is I emailed teachers with statements about their performance for the year. And within that email, within that letter, I stated that, they're being offered a renewal, they're being rehired. I thank them for their hard work. And then for those who are not returning, I included whether they would like to meet on Zoom or have or FaceTime or have a phone call, that I'd be more than willing to do so. But I didn't, the message or the letter that I sent to them was mostly positive. So, there's this saying, you lather a person before you shave them. So it was mostly positive about everything that they've done, all the hard work that they've done, and that we appreciate it. But that, we were not renewing, we have to part ways, and please consider me, when you're asking for a recommendation letter, you can always use me as a reference. And that's basically what I did. I did propose it. By the way, before all this, I did ask teachers whether they wanted meetings or letters, or so. So that's a good way to just ask teachers what are they more comfortable with. But you should already know by now who you want to renew, and who you want to keep, and who you want to let go.
I would also like to add to that. In February, we typically send out an intent form for the teachers to share with us what their intentions are for the upcoming year, so it gives us a better idea as to who we have even available to us. So we gathered that when we got it in March, but now things have changed, right? So I would encourage, and I think we have talked about it on our admin level, is do a follow-up, do another intent form and say, okay, if this is a hybrid situation, if this is a fully virtual, are you still interested? Because then your pool might change as well. And some people who were not able to do full-time before, for whatever reason, if you're doing online, may be available full-time. So I think it's a good opportunity to reevaluate who your pool of teachers are as well. I know it's not really about evaluation, but since we're talking about that pool.
Yeah, and another question that is, do you expect teachers to work during the summer, or, to work on the curriculum, revamping it, if it looks like it's going to be online learning for next year? And what kind of professional development on blended learning are you able to offer? So it's kind of two questions. So one is them working during the summer, That's one thing. And then also kind of professional development and support, and how to balance the online and in-person teacher support.
I think as we're looking to offer contracts for the upcoming year, we would be very transparent and say this is a possibility, and probably develop some sort of growth plan or professional development plan with each of those teachers, as well as an expectation as what the school has. If that entails having, a couple of days of focused curriculum redevelopment over the summer, then that's something that our school would have to do, or any school would have to do. I think that also speaks to the culture that you have built at your school, and how willing the teachers are to spend some additional in-service days over the summer to prepare for that.
So would the teachers be paid over the summer is another question.
I was actually thinking about maybe starting, when I'm working on the calendar, I'll probably have to start with in-service a week earlier than normal, with in-service week. And then, so last week of July, we would start our in-service week, and maybe give teacher like stipends to come in during that last week of July, and then continue for the rest of the year. Just so that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, similarly, I would just say that, your budget may be affected if, you are considering, virtual platform in any capacity next year. The requirement for the number of teachers that you may have could shift. So you could think of that as shifting some of the money that you would have and otherwise utilized for more teachers could potentially, depending on your situation, shift into paying teachers to come in and work on developing a more robust online structure. Because at least I'll speak for myself. I feel like we did a decent job of getting things ready within, a week and 2 weeks or whatever it was. But if I were to be able to map it out from the beginning for a year online, it would probably look a little different than what I've, worked out with my teachers for now. So you will need to invest some resources, but you may have the opportunity to do that depending on your staffing needs as you, work on that intent form, as you work on determining what your need is for the school. And I would also just throw it out there that you may not be able to start school in August. Like maybe you have to sit down and make a hard decision about, well, maybe we need to delay it by, a few weeks or something so that we can buy more time. This is the time when those decisions are not going to be looked at as that crazy, And another school year, if you delayed the start, parents would probably go up in arms. But now they might be willing to, give you that time so that you can work out a proper system, for your school.
And have any of you done any teacher observations during the online learning? I think that's kind of what the other question was asking too, about teacher observations, not just for rehiring, but for growth, for teachers that you are going to still be hiring, but are you doing any kind of online teacher observations, and how?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. At our school, we have a culture that principal can walk into any room at any time, and things just keep going. Students do not stop. They do not come look at us. Once in a while, a student will wave, but they just know. They call me Ustad, so Ustad's in the room, as far as in the room. And so I've been popping into online sessions all throughout for all of my teachers. And it's, I try to pop in, they just know Ustad's there, and they just leave them, and they don't even acknowledge me. But I have been able, and it's been really good because, there has to be quality control on our end. And so I've been able to give specific feedback, like, hey, if you're using this tool, here's a way to make the use of the tool better. Maybe cut down the amount of, direct instruction time because I saw some students just not really with you. Here's how you can, make that a little bit more engaging or dynamic. So it goes to your school culture and admin culture, but I definitely would encourage you to pop in, no matter the age, no matter the teacher. And as far when we pop into those elementary students, they just love seeing you. Maybe they haven't seen you in a while, they miss you. So I don't really get to interact so much with kindergarten, but when I see them, I get so excited, and they get really excited too, because you're just someone that they know in the building. So as admin, I think you should, go ahead and pop in and make it an expectation. And the goal is to help improve everyone's, practice.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah.
Yeah, all of our live sessions are posted. We have a shared document. Everyone's Zoom IDs, everything is accessible to anyone within the faculty. So we have people popping in and out. And in our elementary school, we have the teachers share slide decks. So a set of slides of activities that the students do independently. And then they have live sessions too. So I'm able to give feedback on those slide decks and the activities that are shared with the students, as well as give feedback when I pop in to different classes. So it's been good. It's unfortunate that we can't see the kids as often as we'd like. There's one grade level that has scheduled me in, so once a week I go in and I do some brain teaser puzzles with them, just because I don't get that level of interaction with them anymore. So that's been nice too.
And someone pointed out, and I'm glad they did, I wanted to bring this to everyone's attention, is to contact your state Department of Education, because many of them are offering free PD, free guidance in all different areas. So this one is from New York, where the principal says that New York is offering online PD training that's geared to distance learning. So definitely make use of that source, and of course be in touch with your LEA to see what's available and what's not. And especially, I have to say, with the CARES guidance, it's important that you're well informed in that area. The other questions, we have a little bit of time, so if anyone has anything else, but the question about what kind of tuition would the school would offer if you're going to be teaching virtually next year, and we are going to have a webinar next Saturday that talks about opening for this next school year. We'll probably have that come up, but if anyone of the presenters want to offer what they might have already been thinking about for next year, that's one question, is discounted tuition if it's going to be virtual. I mean, some schools have said that teachers are working harder, so tuition shouldn't be discounted. But what are your thoughts on this?
At our school, the board makes the decisions on the tuition, but I can say that based on what the conversations that we've had, is that if we were to go full virtual, like Ismail said earlier, a lot of these platforms are offering free subscriptions right now. But looking at the pricing that they have now, and if we were to move that into the fall, our online school might be just as expensive, if not more, than our regular tuition, especially with reduced number of teachers and students. So that ratio goes up a little bit more. So I can't say that it would change too drastically, but I think it should be communicated to the parents, whatever that is, that it could be subject to change.
I would also promote that same thing, and I would promote just keeping things the way they are, what everyone is used to. There's this sentiment about normalcy and a return to normalcy and preserving normalcy. So if the teacher salaries, which is usually your biggest item on the budget, right? If teacher salaries are not changing, then just slowly break it down to parents that, hey, the tuitions will remain the same because our salaries and our expenses are still the same. Yeah, that's what I would encourage, just keeping it the same.
I think, Sister Isma, if you need to close out.
Yes. Let me see. Jazakumullah khairan, everyone. MashaAllah. I think I can speak on behalf of everyone when I say it was really informative. I would like to thank once again our speakers, panelists who worked so hard and who prepared to share this information with us. I would like to thank all participants who took out the time and were able to join us today for their valuable questions that I'm sure some of us had in mind, some that we might not have been thinking at this time, but you brought it to our attention. And may Allah put barakah in our time, the time of everyone who has been working so hard. And I feel it has been Teacher Appreciation Week this past week, and Administration Day on the 1st of May. I would like to just give a shout out to everyone for working so hard. MashaAllah, I think Islamic school teachers and principals have proven that they can do anything. And they have literally, with such small teams, most Islamic schools have small teams. They don't have the same resources as public schools, but they have, mashallah, everyone has gone online within a week. and everyone is focusing on how to end the school year, how to begin the school year. Jazakumullah khair, everyone, to your hard work. May Allah put barakah in it. A very blessed Ramadan to everyone, inshallah. And please don't forget to join us next Saturday for our opening of the school year, which will be presented, inshallah, with lots of valuable information. I saw some questions that were talking about that they joined late. A recording of this webinar along with the slides will be available on CISNA's website at www.cisnausa.org. And Jazakumullah khair. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wal asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Assalamu alaikum.